Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Talk on the Block for today, Wednesday, the 16th day of February in the year 2022. I'm your host, Sean Douglas. We're live here on Q95 in the middle of Roseau, in our capital city, Dominica, and it's indeed a pleasure to have you for the next 58 or 59 or so minutes. Today on Talk on the Block, we have a very interesting guest, very interesting topic this afternoon. As you know, on Monday, the IMF Executive Board, they released this statement and at the conclusion of their Article 4 consultation. Dominica, as you know, is a member of the IMF, and every year, usually, the IMF comes here to Dominica and they do what they call an Article 4 consultation, where they speak and sit with government officials at various levels, Ministry of Finance and other ministries, other line ministries, and also they also meet the private sector. And so they were here and they've issued a statement on their mission to Dominica. And that statement was issued on Monday, the 14th of February. And so joining me to discuss this IMF statement and other issues connected with the economy of Dominica is Dr. Thomson Fontaine, who, as you know, is a Dominican born, based in Juba, South Sudan. And it's indeed a pleasure to have him here this afternoon on Talk on the Block. So let's say good afternoon to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Hello, Dr. Fontaine, can you hear us? Okay, we're having some difficulty, so we'll get back to him in a while. Dr. Fontaine, I can see you. I'm hoping that you can hear me. We hoping to speak to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Of course, Dr. Fontaine, as you know, is Dominican by birth. He worked in Dominica. He's worked in the US as a professor. He's done a number of consultancies around the world. He holds a PhD in financial and international economics from Clemson University. He also served at the IMF as an economist for a number of years. He advised country governments in the area of economic policy and provided training and technical assistance to central bankers and government officials in the Caribbean, Africa, and the Middle East. As you know, he was a senator in the House of Assembly for 3 years, and an economist and international consultant, providing economic policy advice to governments and private sector businesses across the globe. It says also that he was an adjunct professor, or he was also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, University College in the US. So Dr. Fontaine, can you hear us now?
Yes, Sean, I can hear you loud and clear. And let me say very good afternoon to you and to your many listeners. It's great to be here. And let me congratulate you as well for the great job that you've been doing on Talk on the Block.
Well, Thomson, I have been around for a very long time, very long time. I I started as a young boy at SMA, even before that at the Rosa Boys School, and learned the trade and worked my way, and of course was influenced a lot by my uncles Mike and Rosie and Fidel Castro and Michael Manley and Maurice Bishop, Samara Machel. So really, I'm just basically trying to do what I have learned and lived over the last, I would say, 30, 40 years. So it's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon and indeed over the last month and a half doing Talk on the Block. I really enjoyed it. It's very taxing because, of course, I have to make that trip every day, but the adrenaline keeps me going. But Dr. Fontaine, I referred to this statement issued by the IMF Executive Board on Monday. They concluded the article for consultation. Before we get into the statement, just reading through the statement, there are a number of terms that have been mentioned there, and I would like to really explain those terms before we get into the questions. And a couple of things, for example, a couple of terms like you hear terms like, or you see terms like current account deficit, overall deficit, social transfers, Fiscal Responsibility Act, correspondent banking relationships. Some of those terms, Dr. Fontaine, in that press statement there, I'd want you, before we start into this thing, to really explain what these terms mean, starting with current account deficit, overall deficit, and non-performing loans.
Yes, sure, Sean. This is excellent. I think that's good because it's important that our listeners understand what it is we are talking about. The current account deficit basically is the balance that the country have between the trade, basically what the country does with the rest of the world, the country's relationship with the rest of the world. So all of our goods and services that we export, you compare the value of that against the goods and services value that you import into the country. It's a deficit because we are importing a lot more goods and services than we're exporting. So we have this huge, if you like, current account debt. But in terms of the current account, it is specifically related to services like the tourism receipts and goods, imports of goods into the country.
Okay, so what about the fiscal deficit now, which was mentioned in the statement?
Yeah, so the fiscal deficit is what the government utilizes. Government presents, for example, its budget every year, which is really a statement of revenues and expenditures. So the government looks at all of its revenues that it derives through taxation and other means. In the case of Dominica, it gets it through the CBI revenue, and it does grants and loans. So those revenues compared against its spending on what we call current services and capital services. Current services are things like tax, like wages, social security payments, and so on. Capitals spending, things like road construction, projects, housing, and so on. So when you compare the amount that government is taking in the form of revenue against what they are spending, the difference there, that balance, it is a surplus if they're making more than they are spending, but a deficit if they are spending more than they're making.
What about social transfers? What does that mean?
Social transfers, that's a very important, especially in the case of Dominica, it's extremely important. It has been rising a lot lately. And that is basically, if you like, the spin-off from the Red Clinic, those transfers that the government makes to individuals. And it also includes as well some of the social security transfers that the government engages in.
And then it talks about non-performing loans. That is a serious problem right now.
Yes, so non-performing loans, the banking system tend to give loans to individuals and businesses, and sometimes to government. When individuals or businesses are not able to repay those loans, it becomes non-performing. So that's what we mean by a non-performing loan. It simply means loans that individuals who have taken those loans are not able to repay. And therefore, it's a liability on the banking system. It's a cost to the banking system because they would have given those monies out to individuals and they're not able to get those monies back.
Thomson, I want to play now. I've got somebody from Q95 to Richie Farrell to read the executive summary, not the full report. It's about 78 pages or so, but the executive summary. It's about a couple of minutes. So I'm going to play the full statement. And then afterwards, I'll invite you to, I'll ask you questions based on what the statement actually said. So just bear with us, listen to this short statement from the IMF.
Or if you would like to make
Sure.
The Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, concluded on February 2nd, 2022, the Article 4 consultation with Dominica. The report reads as follows. The COVID-19 pandemic took a heavy toll on the Dominican economy. GDP is estimated to have contracted by 11% in 2020 and is expected to recover modestly to 3.7%. The output decline, driven by a sharp reduction in tourism and related sectors, was contained by strong growth in the construction sector, stemming from the large public investment program through 2020 to 2021, financed by exceptionally high revenue from the Citizenship by Investment program. Despite record CBI revenue, the sharp decline in tax revenue and increase in health spending and social transfers led to large fiscal deficits in 2020 and 2021 and caused public debt to peak at an estimated 106% of GDP in 2020. The current account deficit estimate remained high at around 30% of GDP in 2020 to 2021, owing to the loss of tourism exports and an increase in imports related to higher public investment and commodity prices, despite a decline in private demand for imports. The financial sector has remained liquid and stable during the pandemic, but non-performing loans, NPLs, remain above prudential benchmarks. The loan service moratoria authorized by banks and credit union regulators supported firms and households facing income loss, containing a deterioration in portfolio performance. In the medium term, growth is expected to recover, underpinned by the return of tourism, expanding hotel capacity, and high public investment in infrastructure resilient to natural disasters financed by CBI revenue. Risks are skewed to the downside and include renewed worldwide and domestic COVID-19 contagion waves, CBI revenue and/or official financing below projected levels, which would slow public investment and economic activity. Weakness in the financial sector, particularly the credit unions, could amplify downside risks. Executive directors agreed with the thrust of the staff appraisal. They commended the authorities for their pandemic response to support households and businesses. They noted that the outlook for medium-term growth is promising, but remains subject to significant downside risks, including from the pandemic trajectory and recovery of tourism. This calls for continued efforts to contain the pandemic and support the recovery in the near term, including by addressing vaccine hesitancy. Looking ahead, directors encouraged sustained reforms to ensure debt sustainability, strengthening the financial sector, and improve climate resilience. Given the increase in public debt during the pandemic, directors underscored the significance of maintaining momentum on fiscal consolidation. They welcomed the approval of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which will support the reduction of public debt and the achievement of the regional debt target. Going forward, directors recommended creating space for investment, focused on building resilience to natural disasters, and prioritizing expenditure efficiency measures, including a civil service reform and better targeting of social transfers. They also encourage measures to improve tax administration and broaden the tax base. Directors also stressed the need for prudent use of citizenship by investment revenue. They encouraged the authorities to save part of CBI revenue for self-insurance against natural disasters and public debt reduction. Directors also considered that securing additional insurance as part of a layered insurance framework would help cover losses in the case of large and extreme disasters. The directors noted that while the financial sector remains liquid and stable, long-standing sectoral vulnerabilities persist, including high non-performing loans and capital adequacy gaps. In this regard, they welcomed the bank's plans to strengthen capital buffers to meet increasing loan loss provisioning requirements for the non-bank sector. Directors highlighted the significance of addressing capital and liquidity requirements and strengthening supervision. They also encouraged maintaining progress on strengthening the AML-CFT framework to minimize risk to correspondent banking relationships. Directors encouraged the authorities to implement structural reforms aimed particularly at reducing informality in the economy and fostering inclusive, sustainable growth more broadly. They also noted that progress on structural reforms that boost competitiveness and build resilience to natural disasters, along with fiscal consolidation, would help strengthen external sustainability. It is expected that the next Article 4 consultation with Dominica will be held on the standard 12-month cycle.
Yes, that was the full statement they read by Richie Farrell. Thank you very much from Q95. The IMF Executive Board issued a statement at the conclusion of the annual Article 4 consultation. So here we have the full statement. Dr. Fontaine, are you still with us? Okay, I think we may have lost Dr. Fontaine temporarily. We'll get him back very soon. Okay, so while we await Dr. Fontaine to come back, we're just going to play this this song by Shadow there, while we just work out the technical difficulties there.
Children hungry, nothing in the pot. He gone by DJ, but to bed.
Yes, you just listened to a calypso there. Poverty is held by the mighty shadow. We're just trying to get back in touch now with Mr. Dr. Thomson Fontaine there in Juba in South Sudan.
Yeah. Yeah, killer. Shout out to them DJs that are gonna drop this one. Fearless. Dom. And Nika. I realize you victimize people with open eyes. Everyone's talking about how D is sweet, but how sweet is really sweet when hungry people cannot eat, huh? You're in a system and you know you need more because you're poor. No guarantees when you walk outside your door, huh? Man going back door just to get a bread, and by the time you come back home, quarantine don't kill that dead. Still hand to mouth, no matter how hard you try. It's like everything you do in that country is bound to die, huh? Red or you dead, everybody know the thing. That's why we party and we see up and we free up and we bling. People living a lie, and cannot even speak their mind even if they're about to die. Damn, what have I really done to you? What have I done to deserve the pain that you put me through? I'm skillful with my hands and I got a master plan, but I only seem to make it when I get away from you. Damn, the nigga, you're beautiful indeed, but beauty ain't worth a damn thing to a man in need. Damn, the nigga, I pray you will be free from the clutches of those that made you do them things to me. I know some people listening and thinks I'm a clown and wondering to themselves, why is he crying the country down? But I am human with a voice that is loud, and ooh, I love to speak about the things of which I'm proud. 365 rivers we brag about, and yet we still bringing in water on the pot. Wait, no need to teach. Even a fool know you don't bring sand to the beach. Things really hard where I from, boy, you tight. And the type of...
Hello, Dr. Fontaine, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much.
I can hear you loud and clear.
I'm getting very worried there, Dr. Fontaine. Dr. Fontaine, we lost a couple of minutes, but we are now back live. It's a long way from Dominica, very long way. Dr. Fontaine, yes, we just Richie Farrell from Q95 read the full statement from the IMF Executive Board. Just give us, what are the for you in your mind the major takeaways from this statement from the IMF?
Yes, that's a very good question to start the ball rolling, Sean. The major takeaway is that the Dominican economy is in trouble. That to me says it all. What do I mean the Dominican economy is in trouble? Well, we have this very heavy dependence on the CBI revenues. The economy fell by at least 11% last year. Now, if you compare that to Hurricane Maria,
or was it 2020?
2020, yes, yeah. In 2020. Mm-hmm. Compare that to Hurricane Maria, which fell by about 17%. So you get the idea of how deep that fall was. And it's because we are so tied into the CBI, when obviously the sale of passports would have dropped off for some time and would have gone into trouble. But when you look at that and the fact that the debt levels, Dominica is now approaching a position of debt distress. That's another major takeaway. We're now becoming a heavily indebted country from having a very reasonable debt level 6 years ago to over 100% in 2021, 106% to be exact. So if I could summarize the major takeaways, the economy is in trouble. Too heavy a dependence on CBI revenues. We have this debt dependence. And the other thing that really struck me about this is the shrinking size of the private sector in Dominica.
Dr. Fontaine, you said about 7 or 8 years ago that the economy was in a state of collapse. It has not collapsed. Do you think that the CBI is the main reason for that? The CBI revenue?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The CBI is the life support for Dominica. Without the CBI revenues, would have been in serious trouble. I'll give you an example of that. In 2020, for example, the government collected just about $330 million in taxes, but the expenses were $960 million. And it's because there was CBI revenues of $440 or so million that made the economy not collapse. So if you remove this CBI revenue, if you were to rely on traditional sources of financing, which is our tax base, grants, and loans, we would be in deep trouble. So yes, the economy has been in a state of collapse, but like you can be in a coma, you are dead to the world, but you're kept alive on life support. And that's what's happening there in Dominica. We have been kept on life support through the CBI program. And the obvious question that comes to mind is, how long can this last? How long can this go on?
Dr. Fontaine, you mentioned the debt to GDP ratio is 106%. What is the recommended safe level for countries like Dominica?
For countries like Dominica, the recommended level is less than 60%. In fact, the ECCB region has a target of 60% of GDP by the year 2035. More advanced countries like in the US, you're talking about rates of less than 20%, 13, 14, 15% of GDP. So having a rate of 106% is extremely high. That puts us in a higher bracket of debt distressed countries in the world.
But debt by itself is not bad unless, if for example you invest in the money wisely, isn't it?
No, it's debt, absolutely. Debt by itself is not bad, but look at the kind of debt that we're incurring. We have, for example, a key part of this run-up in the debt levels is the high level of domestic debt. In fact, between 2016 and 2020, we increased our domestic debt by $367 million. So this has an impact on the economy itself domestically, because what that means effectively is that the government is pushing aside the private sector, is pushing aside individuals. Because if you're taking that kind of money from the banking system, it means that the banks have no more money to lend to private individuals or to the private sector. So you have that problem. And also, because of this, the way that debt is being accrued, it is not going to capital spending necessarily, because most of the capital spending taking place in Dominica is on account of the CBI program. So you have to agree that a lot of these monies are being borrowed for social transfers that we talked about earlier, and also to support the government in office. And that is not good debt. That is bad debt. That can only have an impact on the economy down the road.
Dr. Fontaine, in the statement there, it says in a particular section that they commended the authorities for their pandemic response to support households and businesses. Now, I'm asking myself, what support that households and businesses in Dominica get? Because we haven't, unless they told the IMF that they provided support, but we have not seen that support.
Yeah, I think they're referring there to some monies that came from the World Bank. And at the other time, the IMF gave $14 million, but that was negligible. I mean, I think Dominicans have been complaining that there was no stimulus. It's very negligible. I think the IMF has been kind to the government of Dominica, because that they themselves gave $14 million and the World Bank gave a certain amount. So yes, monies were given, but as to how far it went in supporting households, how far it went in supporting businesses, that is really questionable. But Sean, before we move too far away from it, I wanted to make a point concerning the debt. We throw around numbers, and people might not always understand the extent of this. When we talk about 106% of debt to GDP, what this translates to is that every single child, every single adult, every boy, every man, every girl, every woman in Dominica owes at least $23,000. All right, that's how much, if you were to put it per person. If you were to look at the household, every household in Dominica on average would be owed $100,000. That is how bad it is.
Thomson, you said earlier on that, and the statement confirms that the economy contracted by 11% in 2020. But bear in mind, Thomson, that most economies in the world, certainly major economies in the world, contracted sharply in 2020 because of COVID. Only China, I believe, which had a very miserly figure, I think about 2% growth, but most economies, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, they all contracted. So I suppose it's no surprise that we in Dominica contracted by 11%.
Well, it's the extent of the dip. It is true that, you know, and the extent of the dip. Bear in mind, for example, economies like Antigua, Barbados, and so on, they would have contracted more than Dominica because there was this heavy reliance on tourism. And because of this heavy reliance on tourism, which drives the economy, people stop traveling. You would expect this. But Dominica, that's not the case. Dominica is not heavily reliant on tourism. Tourism contributes probably about 5-6% to GDP. So it was not because of tourism or tourists not coming in. It was because of the contraction in the CBI program and the contraction in the public sector spending of government. Those could have gone ahead in 2020. So I think it has to do with a mismatch. It has to do with economic management. It has to do a lot with the government's ability to use the available resources to keep the economy afloat and to do what was necessary in 2020.
Dr. Fontaine, you know, you hear over the last year or two, certainly the last budget address, the Prime Minister speaking about this dynamic Dominica. Do you see that what he's talking about, Thomson? This dynamic
Well,
Dominica?
Sean, you're on the ground. If you were to ask the average person, if you were to just go outside the studios of Q95 right now and ask anybody passing by whether Dominica is dynamic, they will tell you no, they're not feeling it. I think in Dominica, Dominicans will tell you that there is a lot of misery, there's a lot of poverty, there is a lot of unemployment, there is a lot of struggling to make ends meet. That is the reality of today's Dominica. There is no dynamism in the economy. There is no efforts, for example, by the government to spur growth within the agriculture sector or within the manufacturing sector. Not even within the tourism sector, you see much efforts other than the building of hotels. So, you know, the idea that you can somehow speak growth and exuberance in the economy by mouthing words, you know, is meaningless because the people on the ground know differently.
Yeah, Dr. Fontaine, the statement talks about they expect the economy to grow by more than 3.7%. But I remember years ago you were saying that an economy like Dominica should be growing at least the rate of 7% per annum to bring about any meaningful, you know, for people to actually feel that growth. Do you still believe that?
Absolutely. And Sean, I'm glad you remember a lot of what I said. That means at least people are listening. That's good. I'm encouraged by this. Yeah. Indeed, you need to be growing the economy by at least 6 to 7% for people to start to feel that they are part of this, that the gain, the growth is widespread. It is touching all of their lives. That's not the case in Dominica. And I'm also very worried by the fact that even after a dip of 11%, you're only recovering by 3%. So that means after 2 years, you're still down by 8% because you would not have recovered your gain. You would expect that after a major crisis, as we had in 2020, where the economy fell by 20%, you would have expected a much more robust increase in 2021, but that's not the case. So it tells me again, it goes back to the management of the economy. It goes back to the fact that the government has, and if you read through the IMF report, they keep talking about this blessing that Dominica has of high CBI revenues. But the only thing that the CBI revenues appear now to be used for is on public sector investment program, more particularly housing and hotel building. But that is not going to cut it. And you know why it's not going to cut it, Sean? Is because there's a very simple thing at operating there. We all know in Dominica that the houses are not being built by Dominicans for the most part. The hotels are not being built by Dominicans. So what does this mean? This means effectively that the impact is not being felt on the ground. Now, let me explain that in simpler terms. If, for example, you hire a local Dominican masonry or somebody to do masonry or a carpenter or somebody to help build a house in Dominica or to help in a hotel construction. If this individual has $1, there's a likelihood that he will go to the shop and spend this $1, probably on a beer. Let's assume, just to make it simple, he buys a beer for $1 in the shop, right? So now the shopkeeper has $1. The shopkeeper then turns around and buys some goods from a wholesaler and gives this dollar to the wholesaler. This $1 has become $3. It has multiplied itself because of the spending by this one individual. So at the end of the month, it appears as if you had really not $1 in the economy, but $3. Dominicans refer to it as money meeting money. Dominicans understand the economics. They might not know the theory, but they understand it. That's money meeting money because $1 effectively becomes $3. Now, you take the same dollar and you give it to a foreigner. The foreigner is not going to spend in the shop in Grand Fort in La Plaine. The foreigner is going to send this money back to St. Lucia, and it has the effect on the St. Lucian economy. So that's one of the reasons why you find that although there is high levels of spending in Dominica, but the effect is not reaching the ground. It is not being felt because a lot of this spending is going outside of Dominica and it is not within the economy. It is not circulating within the economy. This multiplier effect, which increases the value of $1 earned by a local Dominican living and spending in Dominica, is simply not there.
Dr. Fontaine, we have this issue for the last couple of years of monies raised through the CBI, but not actually reaching here. You have worked and advised governments around the world. Is that something that's normal where billions of dollars are raised and that money does not find itself in the country itself? Is that normal?
This is not normal. This is criminal, actually. It's not normal. It is criminal. Really, these monies are supposed by law to be going into the consolidated funds. All of it, not part of it, all of it. This is monies that have been raised. It's like the government taking your tax dollars and putting a part of it overseas. That would be illegal. The exact same thing. And I always compare Dominica with St. Kitts and Nevis. If you look at Dominica and you compare it to St. Kitts and Nevis, this is the tale of two very different countries, both with the CBI programs. One program, St. Kitts and Nevis, transparent, accountable, or every single dollar coming back into the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis. Dominica, lack of transparency, nobody held accountable, part of the money coming back in. A few years ago, when I worked in St. Kitts for the St. Kitts government, they actually sought my advice on ways to invest, on ways to spend, not to spend, on ways to make those monies grow for them. And what we have now, we have a case where St. Kitts is growing by leaps and bounds, growth rates of 9-10% in St. Kitts and Nevis. I understand in the past 10 years or so, several thousand Dominicans have gone to St. Kitts in search of work. And it is not working for us. So it comes back to basic mismanagement that we have. And to think that the government in this day and age can get away with storing, whichever way you call it, hiding, storing, but the bottom line is these monies are kept outside of Dominica, outside of the consolidated fund, outside of the reach of the government to be able to use to benefit the country. It certainly cannot be right, and it's something that the government certainly has to stop and should really bring all of the monies back into Dominica.
Mm-hmm. Just two things I want to discuss in that statement before we go to telephone calls. One is the issue of, we've relied so much in the past and at the present on CBI revenue. What can we do to broaden our tax base? Because the statement from the IMF talks about broadening our tax base, improving tax administration. What can we do to broaden our tax base? We're so reliant on CBI. We almost feel there's nothing else we can do. We're in South Africa promoting passport sales in other parts of Pakistan, Islamabad, all those countries. And yet there are things we can do to earn more revenue for the country. How do we broaden that tax base?
The best way, the most proven way to do this is by expanding the private sector. if you expand the private sector, if you help create jobs, if you keep what you have, you keep Ross, you keep the 400 or so companies that have shut down in Dominica over the past 20 years. Imagine you have 400 companies employing an average of 5 people. These are 2,000 jobs that may have been lost over the past 10 years in Dominica. So the way you would increase the tax base is by having more people working, more people employed. The biggest employer today in Dominica is the Dominica government. What the Dominica government has also done is that they have effectively, the term we use in economics is called crowding out. They are so prevalent, they are so much into the economy that they have pushed aside the private sector. This is seen or shown by the number of businesses that have been shut down. I just learned, for example, that Deepex, is shut down. People were taking pictures there, and at one time it was a very profitable company. They shut down. That was just the latest of many that has closed their doors in Dominica. So the government, at the same time, is accessing monies that otherwise should have been going to the private sector. So the way you increase your tax base is to allow space for the private sector to grow and thrive, provide incentives for businesses, provide incentives in manufacturing, in water manufacturing, for example, or in essential oils, or in agro-processing. That's the way you can increase that tax base so that you have a more sustainable form of money. Because what's going to happen, and we keep saying it over and over again, and I keep warning that the CBI resources, they are not sustainable. A major risk to the CBI program as we speak today is that third countries might decide enough is enough. Mm-hmm. That they're tired of having people who can't speak English, for example, flashing Dominican passports and coming into Europe visa-free. That might shut down. Assuming the Europeans decide to shut down the visa-free access of Dominican passports, that could shut down a significant portion of the CBI trade. So that's a major risk. So the CBI is that it is not sustainable. On the other hand, if you build sustainable businesses within the country and you help businessmen, local hoteliers, for example, local restaurateurs, local persons making soap or different products and so on. If you help them maintain a base in Dominica, you could have tax revenues for many, many years to come. This is not the same for CBI revenues. So we're making a very big mistake in believing that this largesse of CBI will continue forever and that we keep ignoring this other sector of the economy. Big mistake.
Yeah. And you talk about hotels, Dr. Fontaine. When I think of the government, they're building hotels over the place. There's one building in Lalekoko, there's one in Salisbury, there's the one Anichi in Portsmouth, and they're talking about building another hotel on the side of the old public works garage. And you have a situation where in Portsmouth you have about 3,000 or 4,000 empty hotel rooms. You have Gary Hotel cannot reopen, Evergreen Hotel in a state of flux. All these indigenous Dominican built hotels, these people, they need assistance, and the government decides instead to provide resources through CBI for mostly foreigners. And in the case of when they help people locally, it's people who support them.
Yeah, Sean, so you see what's going on there, because you're talking about, for example, hotels which might cost $20 million. All of a sudden, it costs $85 million. What exactly is going on? Mm-hmm. Are you really building hotels, or are you enriching individuals? I mean, what truly is happening? And that, I think, is what Dominicans need to ask. Because if the government was really concerned about the tourism sector, if their real emphasis was on helping tourism grow in Dominica, they would provide some assistance to the local hoteliers, whether it is a Fortune or a Garway or Castaways, whatever it is, whatever hotel, whatever local hotel business, they would have been supporting those businesses. But that's not the case. So it tells me that there is something more going on than just the idea of helping the tourism sector rebound.
We'll take a short break and we'll get back. When we get back, we'll start taking some phone calls.
What does a coffee lover like me desire? Everything a cup of Cafe Brazil delivers. I need a coffee that's smooth. I need a coffee that's rich. I need a coffee bursting with flavor. You see, coffee isn't just a drink, it's an experience. At least when it's Cafe Brazil.
Indulge in the distinctive flavors of perfectly blended Robusta and Arabica coffee beans. Cafe Brazil. Taste the smooth, rich difference. Try our new Cafe Brazil Gold Coffee today.
Make home a happy place with furniture from Astafans and Company Limited. Furniture for every room, beds, closets, wardrobes, side tables, even bathroom and toilet accents and accessories. Work or study from home with a brand new computer desk and chair. Relax with living room furniture, TV stands, center tables, indoor and outdoor chairs. Any piece of custom furniture you need is also available at J. Astafans and Company Limited's Furniture Factory. Call today 255-2791 or 255-2793 and make your house a home. Astafans, right place, right price.
Yes, so welcome back to Talk on the Block here on Q95 FM. We're discussing the recent report by the IMF Executive Board. They concluded an article for consultation in Dominica recently, and Dr. Thomson Fontaine has been with me for the last 40 or so minutes discussing that statement. We're now ready to take your phone calls. Numbers to call. Let's take the first call on the overseas line. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, Mr. Douglas. How are you?
I'm good, caller, but caller, we only have 15 minutes, so try and keep your contribution as concise as possible. Thank you.
Yes, I will do that. If one goes back to basically Max in the Morning times ago, one will recall that most of the findings of the IMF, I talked about those things. I talked about the capital that may have to be infused in the bank. I talked about the loan loss allowance. I talked about the provisioning. I also talked about the need for restructuring the financial services sector. Now, the other interesting thing is that here is Dr. Fontaine. The St. Kitts CBI program is working beautifully because at the inception of the St. Kitts program, it was the Honorable Edison James that had advised the St. Kitts government, in part, to use part of that fund to replace the sugar industry that had gone out. And here is Dr. Thomson Fontaine coming in after and also providing advice on how they could invest their money in addition to that. So basically, it was two persons, senior persons from the United Workers' Party, who are advising St. Kitts, who is doing exceptionally well in the economy, on how to manage their CBI money. Yet in Dominica, we are not using that kind of capacity that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Fontaine, you want to respond briefly?
No, absolutely. You know, sometimes there were times when I was in St. Kitts, I would come close to tears, man. I can tell you, because I was seeing a country that had the same kind of setup like Dominica, but they were clearly leaving Dominica simply because of the governance structure, simply because the government chose a path of being accountable and being transparent. Dominica, we chose the opposite. So one country has moved in one direction with CBI funds, another country has moved in the other direction with CBI funds, and it is truly, truly sad as a Dominican.
Okay, let's go over to line 2. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live on Q95.
Just quickly, Sean, blessings to you. What's up, my brethren?
I'm good, caller. Very good. Go ahead.
Dr. Fontaine, blessings to you. I pray that the Almighty continue to guide and keep you. Just basic ABC. Dominica is governed by a cluster of kleptomaniacs. Dominica is governed by a cluster of thieves. And that is all there is to it. There is no logic to the madness. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Thank you. Would you say, Thomson, that we in Dominica, we are kleptocracy? Would you say that? This is what you see happening?
Well, either we are or we are getting there. But it is clear that, you know, we don't have, I mean, this government has gotten away with so much, you know, for so long. I mean, just this idea that we're talking about, the idea that you can arbitrarily on your own device, decide to keep monies that belong in the treasury, outside of the treasury, outside of the purview of the regulators, outside of the purview of the IMF, outside the purview of anybody responsible, of Parliament even, tells you everything that you need to know.
Okay. Yeah, let's go back to the telephone lines because we haven't got much time. We want to take as many calls as we can. We go over now to line 3. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live on Q95. You have Dr. Thomson Fontaine with us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fontaine. Good afternoon, Sean. It's so nice to hear you.
Good afternoon.
Fontaine. Mr. Fontaine said something earlier that a lot of the monies that have been made in Dominica are sent away. And it's true, because on every site you have here where you have apartments being built, you have hotels being built, it's foreigners that are there. If there were locals working on these sites, a lot of the people would be making their bakes, selling their accra, selling their juices, and money would be made in Dominica. But the only hotel that's functioning right now in Dominica is the COVID hotel, and the people that are supplying the foods to the hotel. And if you have to be red to be supplying the foods to the COVID hotel in Dominica. Bye-bye.
Thank you, caller. Thank you very much. Yes, let's go to the overseas line now. Overseas line. Okay, that caller may have gone. Numbers to call 449-3095. Okay, the overseas line is back. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sean, and good afternoon, Mr. Fountain, Dr. Fountain.
Good afternoon.
Sean, a few years ago, just my observation, a few years ago, about I think 2 or 3 times, a big amount of money was confiscated by the police department and it was put in the bank. So just my observation, I'm just wondering, do you think they know the situation, the economy? So they had to put that money in the bank because they said it's government money to pay their police, teachers, nurses, and them to make them think that everything is going fine, because they can't just go and put the money in the bank. The bank would have to ask them where this money come from, so that they won't be under investigation.
Caller, which money was that, and which bank? I don't know. I don't recall. What year was that?
I don't know, but there was 2 or 3 times money was confiscated by individual on island, and it was put in the bank. I don't know which bank it was put in.
Okay.
But I just think that money was to pay the teachers, the nurses, the police officers, because they know the condition of the economy in the country. There's no money coming in. That's just my observation. Thank you.
Yes, I'm not quite sure, caller. It would be good to have more specifics, really, so I could respond and I could do some more research.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's difficult to comment on this. I don't know that the government is bringing money outside of the banking system. I have no knowledge of this. No.
Okay, let's go over to line 3 now. Hello, good afternoon. You're live.
Sean, that's the same money that the government, the police confiscated from whoever in Templar, that's 500.
Oh.
And they said they put in the bank.
Okay.
And up to now, we haven't heard nothing on that money. Who money it is and who was responsible for having the money there. Bye-bye.
Yes, Thomson. There was some monies that was confiscated from some building somewhere in Teplat, which is in the Paybush constituency. But details on
that was some private some private individuals.
Yeah, details on that are very sketchy, to be honest. But it'll be interesting to know exactly what happened.
And it's possible that this money could be tied up in the legal system if there were charges, if people were arrested. So it's difficult to say. Yeah.
Okay. Again, this information is information the public would like, because it was announced this money was confiscated. Okay, let's take a call now on the overseas line. Hello, good afternoon, caller. You're live.
Good afternoon, Shawnee. Good afternoon, Dr. Fontaine. Thank you. Because I always believe that government building hotel, but it's so much overestimating of those projects that they're doing, and those projects are individual houses. That too causing the demise of Dominica and Dominicans too. It's not just exporting money, but the amount they're taking for themselves. They don't want Dominicans to get involved, because these Dominicans, especially the accountants, the economists, they get involved, we will know too much. So what they're doing, they're using overseas people to continue killing Dominica, robbing from the people. God bless you. I pray Dominicans realize what Mr. Fontaine realized and stand up, take to the street, protest. We overseas, we want to help too. God bless Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you. SMS sent me a message saying that yes, that monies were in Teplat. The monies were caught in Teplat. Yes, and let me see. I think They say it happened. Two different monies were confiscated. Two monies were confiscated. Yeah. The numbers to call before we end here today: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. We're discussing the IMF Article 4 consultation report on Dominica. I hope that you were able to listen to the report. It's available, I'm sure, on the net. And Dr. Fontaine has been discussing parts of that IMF Article 4 report. Dr. Fontaine, how optimistic are you for the Dominican economy with Roosevelt Skerrit and his regime still in power? How optimistic are you?
On a scale of 1 to 10, 0. Zero optimism. Quite frankly, after 20 years, they're not going to get it done. 22. I don't see 22 years. I don't see
18 ministers, the largest ever cabinet.
18, yeah. I don't see him changing his ways. I don't see. I mean, 20 years is a long time. For some people,
yes, Thomson, we seem to have lost. I hope we can come back.
And
okay, you're back.
To actually go that route is quite remarkable.
Okay. Yes, in the final few minutes here on Talk on the Block, we have here, not often do we have Dr. Thomson Fontaine, born in Dominica, bred in Dominica, right here in Dominica, and we have him on the line there from Juba in South Sudan. So numbers to call: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. Dr. Fontaine, are you still there?
Yes, I'm
okay, that's great. Yeah. Dr. Fontaine, as we come to the end of this program, on this statement from the IMF, I just want to discuss something which is perhaps outside of the statement. When I look at Dominica, we've followed in Dominica for as long as I can remember this first past the post system where, a party wins an election, and in this case, the Labour Party, and means that if you're Labourite, you get a job. If you're not, then you don't. And I think the time has come for us in Dominica to look at changing our system of government where you have a government of all talents. When I look at what you have done in your life and what you've achieved, and yet you're out of Dominica giving advice, policy advice, and your technical expertise gained over several decades to governments overseas as far as South Sudan, and yet you cannot provide that same expertise to your own country because you don't support the government. Something has to be done. We have a system where that we have a country, we have a government of all talents. There are people in the United Workers' Party who have something to contribute. There are people, I'm sure, in the Labour Party who have something to contribute. But it cannot be that one party in power for 22 years and those who have not supported the party have been kept out of decision making. We have to change the system, Dr. Fontaine.
No, absolutely. Sure, we have gotten it so wrong. We have gotten it so wrong. And because we have gotten it so wrong, the country is the victim. The state of Dominica, look at it. Look at the level of poverty in Dominica. Look at the level of hopelessness. Look at the number of persons that are depending on a monthly basis for some handout from a government. We have gotten it wrong. And we really need to change this. We need to come back to the place where people got positions based on merit, that there will always be a support system. But if you allow those who are deserving to lead the way, to get the jobs, to be in the positions, then the country benefits. Everybody benefits from it. But what we have, the system that is so focused on winning elections has not worked for Dominica. And not only that, I think what has made it even worse in Dominica is because some individuals viewed being in government not as an opportunity to serve the people, not as an opportunity to be servants of the people, but as an avenue to riches. And that is the sad thing about Dominica. That to me is the most lamentable part of Dominican politics, that those in government see the politics of being in government as an avenue to amassing riches, not to serving the people of Dominica. And that is regrettable.
Very profound statement. Even people like you, people like Kent Vital, people like Dr. Dangleben, and the list is endless of persons qualified and trained out there who would like to make a contribution, but because you're not red, as I said, better red than dead. Let's take two calls before we close. They must be brief. Hello, good afternoon, caller.
Good afternoon.
Yes, caller, you have about 35 seconds, caller. Go ahead.
Thomson Fontaine, on the CBI that you talk about, that can be used to help hotels that are existing. But that's not how. How are you going to? How are they going to raise the money? Is the local hoteliers going to raise or get the investors to sell the citizenship by investors investment, or the government sell it and give it to them? How would you propose that?
Dr. Fontaine?
I did not get the full question, but I believe he was talking about how do you support the local hoteliers. Well, you do it in the form of grants. You could do it in the form of soft loans, for example, where you give them
actually,
loans,
Thomson, I think he's talking about. Certainly the CBI agents, they would use those resources to raise the money to build the hotels. I think that's what he was not so much about assistance.
No, but you can give the passports to so-called developers. You can give it to the hotel owners. We did it for Sam Raphael, right?
Okay, we seem to be.
Sam Raphael is a case in point. It was done for Sam Raphael.
Can you repeat that?
I don't know why it can't be repeated to other hoteliers.
We lost you for a while. Can you repeat what you just said?
And not only Sam Raphael, but bear in mind there were others. I believe, for example, that many years ago, I believe Gary was able to get some support from the CBI program. So it can be done. But it has to be the case where you want to get that done. You're invested in Dominicans, but that sadly has not been the style of this government.
Yes, it has not been the style, certainly. Well, Dr. Fontaine, we've come to the end of this program. I would like you in these few seconds left to give your closing remarks.
Well, Sean, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I will be back on the radio tomorrow night on the UWP parties program at 8 o'clock. We'll be talking more about this. I think that all of Dominicans should be concerned about this latest IMF report. All of Dominica should make it their business to find out what is going on in Dominica, and also should begin to have a conversation about how we can change it. It is one thing to know what is going on. It's another thing to begin to have a honest conversation about how we can change our trajectory. How can we change direction? We're headed the wrong way. How do we change? How do we turn around? How do we improve our lives? How do we improve the economy? How do we get support for the private sector? How do we get support for struggling youth who are unemployed? How do we get support for the many businesses that are on the verge of closing down?
Dr. Thomson
How do we relieve the pressure on society?
Here.
These are the kinds of conversations that we need to have going forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fontaine. I hope to be in touch with you in the not too distant future. Thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate it, Sean. Thank you.
Yes, we've come to the end of, sadly, another Talk on the Block for today. I couldn't take any more calls because we're now into the next program,